Only 3 weeks remain to Election Day. The clock is ticking down on key races for control of Congress, the Iowa legislature, and the Iowa governor's office. We break down key insights with reporters in the field on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, October 19 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
When elections reach 3 weeks to voting day, many key moments have already passed. Debates have taken place, thousands of television ads have already hit the airwaves, and early absentee voting has already begun. But just where do key races for the U.S. House, the Iowa legislature, and the governor's office stand? We've convened a reporters' roundtable of Iowa journalists to break down the state of the campaign. James Lynch is political reporter for the Gazette. Erin Murphy is Des Moines bureau chief for Lee Enterprises. And Kay Henderson is news director for Radio of Iowa. Well, thank you all for taking time off from the trail to be out here today. I want to just handicap the race for governor. Let's just go around the table. Kay, I'll start with you. What are you seeing in the race for governor?
Well, I think it's interesting that there hasn't been a lot of polling in this race from news organizations. It feels tight. That's what the most recent Iowa poll, which was actually done a few weeks ago, shows. I don't see anything from either campaign in terms of tactics to indicate that it's anything otherwise.
James?
Yeah, I would agree. It feels tight. I feel like both candidates and campaigns are playing it safe. They're pushing their messages, but they're not pushing the envelope, I guess I would say. It also feels like it's a turnout election where they're trying to turn out their base, and I think in Kim Reynolds' case, she's trying to turn out the Branstad base, which includes independent or no-party voters that made him so successful. And if she can do that, she can probably win election. But I don't think it's over.
Erin?
Yeah, I would concur with all of that. Everything that you feel being on the ground and at events this is a close race, and what little polling we have suggests that it's Medicaid versus taxes right now. The Hubble campaign is pushing mismanagement of the Medicaid privatization, and the Reynolds campaign is claiming that Fred Hubble's going to raise taxes and that he's not being forthcoming by not releasing his, and those are the two things we hear about most.
What's interesting to me is that generally political scientists tell us that when the economy is good, it's good for incumbents. This year, it's like the voters are saying it's not the economy, stupid. We care about Medicaid, we care about other issues that seem to be more top of mind than the fact that Republicans cut taxes and that incomes are showing some signs of rising and that we have full employment and all those things are happening. The economy doesn't seem to matter that much to a lot of voters this year.
And I think James hit on a really key point here. What are independents going to do? I think we can tell being out on the hustings that both bases are energized and are going to turn out. It's the independents we have no idea what they're going to do, if they're even going to be engaged. And there's some national polling out this past week that suggests that independents are kind of meh. They're not as engaged and willing to go out and cast a ballot as the two bases are.
And I think that's why, and James also talked about turnout, I think that's why this is more about a turnout election. I agree with that, and it's finding the independents that are trend voters. So they claim to be independents, but they usually vote Republican, usually vote Democrat. I think there's been very little speaking to true swing voters in this election, and I think that's for two reasons, because there aren't that many of them to begin with, and the ones that are, like Kay said, maybe aren't going to vote anyways. So the focus is on finding those people who are likely Democratic voters, may or may not turn out, making sure they get to the polls, and vice versa.
No party voters don't participate in midterm elections very much. I mean, they're like below 50% turnout in recent midterm elections. So it's a pretty small market you're appealing to if you're appealing to those no-party voters. So you have to turn out your bases.
Kay, you mentioned the polling. 538.com, which is a reputable social science / media organization affiliated with the New York Times, says Fred Hubbell has an 85% chance of winning. What do you make of that analysis?
I have no idea. I can't really tell how that came together. I spent a day on the trail with Hubbell, and then about a couple of weeks later, I spent a day on the trail with Reynolds. And what was most interesting to me was an issue that you didn't mention, but education funding was very much on the minds of people talking to both candidates. So I think that's really cutting, because not only is it an issue about funding, but it's an issue about salaries for teachers. And so that's a base that's been mobilized, a union base that may not have been as engaged in a midterm election as they might not otherwise have been because of the Republican legislature in 2017 changing Iowa's collective bargaining law. That may benefit Democrats in terms of midterm turnout where it otherwise might not have been.
James, what's the effect of the Libertarian candidate? Jake Porter is getting 7% in some out-of-date polls now. Who does the Libertarian candidate take the most votes away from? Any thoughts?
I'm not sure, but I think probably Kim Reynolds, because libertarians may be philosophically more aligned with Republican philosophy, although in practice I'm not sure that's the case. But it's really hard to tell. But if he takes, 2% away from the governor, it could very well make a difference.
Erin, do you agree with that? Some think that the Libertarians take votes away from Democrats on social issues.
Yeah, and that's why it's interesting, and why Jem hesitated a little bit, because it is tough to say for sure. I agree in general. It's a little more likely probably that a Libertarian vote is going to peel away from Republican support. But that's a great example you noted. The Republicans Libertarians are calling it for criminal justice reform as a signature issue, and that's something that both parties do talk about, but is maybe more likely to align with the Democratic platform.
And David, on your multiple choice test, I might choose C. None of the above may be the answer why people choose a Libertarian, because they don't like Reynolds and they don't like Hubbell. They don't like the way either party conducts policy or politics, and so they may choose a Libertarian candidate for that purpose.
James, let's switch gears to the congressional races. Give us, what's your analysis of that race up in your neck of the woods in the 1st District?
Well, we've seen this movie before where Rod Blum, who is the incumbent 2-term U.S. representative, he's not supposed to win, but in 2014 and 2016, he did win, despite those odds. In 2016, there was a massive shift in that district from Obama voters to Trump voters, and yet Blum outperformed both Donald Trump and Chuck Grassley in the 1st District. This year, the atmosphere is a little different. The Democratic enthusiasm, the resistance, the anger at the president may hurt Rod Blum. He told me, Trump's not on the ticket, I'm on the ticket. But, if you like Donald Trump, you're going to like Rod Blum and vice versa. So I think in a way it is a referendum. I mean, you're voting for mini-me, you might say, if you're voting for Donald Trump, or for Rod Blum in this race. The polls show he's behind, and I think they're probably right.
But it is true the national parties had pulled out their money early on in the race, saying Finkenauer is going to win. And now we hear reports they're moving back in. Erin, what's caused that? Were the debate performances part of this tightening of this race?
I don't know if it's the debate so much as I think there is, and we don't know about the impact of the Kavanaugh hearings. That's another one that Republicans feel is motivating some of their base and maybe increasing turnout, and that's a more recent development. I think, and James mentioned the Obama-Trump voters, I think there's still a big unknown about where they're going to land in this election if they're going to vote at all. And so there may be some shifting sentiment. They may have some internal polls showing that things are a little closer than they were a couple of months ago.
Well, those Kavanaugh hearings motivated the Republican base all over the country. We're going to look back at that as a real turning point in the campaign. James, over in Eastern Iowa, the other race, the 2nd District, much of a race?
I'm not sure it's much of a race. Chris Peters, the Republican challenger to Dave Loebsack, believes that he's in a better position than he was 2 years ago. Loebsack is being Loebsack, playing a very safe campaign. He's well entrenched there. The numbers are in his favor. I think he's probably on schedule for a re-election.
Erin, hottest race in the state right now is the 3rd District race.
Close one.
Young and Axney.
Yeah, nationally watched. The 3rd District is a very balanced district, partisan-wise, so it's always going to be competitive. The Vice President is in town this weekend to help out David Young. So this is one that both parties are putting a lot of intention, a lot of advertising from national groups getting involved. You watch the ads and you wonder if it's Nancy Pelosi running against Donald Trump in this district and not David Young and Cindy Axney. They're both candidates are trying to be tied to people above them who are maybe less popular on the favorability scales, but very competitive and by all measures that we have in polling and on the ground, another very close race.
The old adage we used to have was that all politics is local. I think if you look at all of Iowa's congressional races, all politics is national. I think if you look at the advertising, that's what we're seeing. If you look at the issues that the candidates, especially in this race, are using, it's nationalized.
Kay, coming under the category of who to thunk, there's talk that Steve King is vulnerable. Is he really?
Well, if you look at the voter registration in that district, you would say no. If you look at King's past races and the margins by which he wins, you would say no. There is some evidence. He faced Christy Vilsack a couple of elections ago. She performed far better in that district because of name recognition, and he's facing this time around a guy named J.D. Scholten, who's, I think, the quintessential non-politician. He former professional baseball player. He's a paralegal, not the greatest speaker in terms of oration, but people who are around him find him to be genuine. And he's raised a ton of cash. He's actually raised more money than Christy Vilsack did. He pulled in the last quarter almost $700,000 compared to King's rather moderate $160,000.
And speaking of King's, it's also it's not uncommon for him to have low fundraising numbers,
right?
But maybe a little more so in a competitive race. You mentioned the Christy Vilsack race. When he had that race, he did raise a decent amount of money. He has not this cycle, and I think that's interesting. And I don't know if that's because his fundraising is drying up or if he's not putting in the effort. But in past races, when he's felt threatened, he has gone out and done the fundraising. This cycle so far, it's been on the left side.
The other thing that I notice in that race is Scholten's crowds are pretty good size for a Democrat in Northwest Iowa.
And I think that goes somewhat to the whole resistance or anger about Donald Trump. The Democrats are motivated, and in Northwest Iowa, there may not be many of them, but they're turning out. And I mean, we see this in the 1st District where, Democrats have a voter registration advantage, but the crowds are bigger this year, certainly bigger than a typical midterm. I mean, I don't know that you can compare them to a presidential election year, but for a midterm, yeah, the numbers are up.
Okay, one of the things that's at work in this election that's a kind of a new wrinkle for us all is the state legislature and the governor in their wisdom got rid of the ability of Iowans to cast a straight ticket vote. What's the political effect of that going to be? Who does that help? Who does it hurt? A voter can no longer go in and mark one box or oval and vote for all the candidates on that ticket. You have to go in and mark each one of them. Who's that help? Who's that hurt?
Interesting anecdote. I was covering Kim Reynolds, and in her standard stump speech to a group of Republicans, she reminded them of that fact, that they're going to have to go through the whole ballot and vote for all the Republicans on the ballot. The most recent data we have is incomplete. It doesn't cover all of the counties, but it seemed to indicate that Republicans were far more likely to cast a straight ticket ballot than were Democrats. So it sort of mystified some people in the legislature as to why they were taking that step. But it's a step that majority Republicans wanted to take. We'll see how it turns out. But you and I know from years of covering politics, if you consider how many people drop off the ballot when they flip it over and vote in those judicial retention elections, there's a huge amount of drop off. So we'll have to see how interested people are in going through the whole ballot and voting for all of those people. It could have impact on some of the statewide races too.
James, what's your take on what were Republicans thinking when they did this? If in fact, as Kay points out, Republicans have usually been the beneficiary of this. Could this hurt Steve King, for example, in that heavily Republican part of Iowa?
I'm not sure what they were thinking. I mean, sort of the conspiracy theory is they were trying to make it harder to vote. You know, that you couldn't just mark that one oval, like you said, and be done. You have to go through the whole list. To me, it seems like it hurts Republicans this time, although if you look at the Democratic enthusiasm, sort of the anger, Democrats are going to have to go down the ballot and fill in every oval this time. They can't just walk in and say, boom, I voted against Donald Trump and be done. I'm not sure what the impact is, but I think it's going to be interesting afterwards to see what, who benefits and who doesn't. But
and I don't know if there's any research on this, but it seems to me that maybe it benefits the party that has the more motivated base at the time, because those voters are more likely to say, all right, I need to go down this list right now because I want to make sure Democrats get here and here and here, and where the party that's less motivated I know this guy, and may be more likely to skip over.
There's been a lot of talk about the millennials finally really coming into the electorate full bore. Millennials being people who were born between 1980 and 1994. But if they're new voters and they're coming in angry at the Trump administration and a good source of votes for Democrats, is anybody telling them they've got to go down and mark all the ovals?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can't just cast a protest vote, say, I'm mad, and that takes care of everyone. You need to know all the races, and that could be a case where they do skip some.
I think that could hurt down ballot races for statewide, for Secretary of Agriculture. I mean, people are motivated to go to the polls for Fred Hubble or Kim Reynolds, but have they heard of Tim Gannon or Mike Nigg? And legislative races and county board races, things like that. It'll be interesting to see how much drop-off there is.
Yeah, it's a new wrinkle in our state's politics, and so it'll be something to watch on election night. Erin, let's turn to the legislature. Is the Iowa House really in play?
Democrats are confident that it is, and it'll be very interesting to watch. There's a couple different kind of districts out there that they're looking at, especially in the suburban areas in the metro and the biggest cities, Des Moines and Cedar Rapids. There's some voter behavior that they think is shifting in their general direction. They think they have a chance to pick off some seats. And then you have along the eastern seaboard of Iowa and those rural counties that were big Obama to Trump swings. Democrats feel some of those voters are swinging back in their direction because of their dissatisfaction with the president this year, and they think there's some seats that they can get back in there too. And they think they know they have to flip 10 seats. They think they can get it done. It'll be a really interesting thing to watch on election night.
James, are we seeing an interesting shift in Iowa's two suburban areas, the areas around Des Moines and Cedar Rapids? Historically, those suburbs have been pretty Republican areas, as true nationally. But now all of a sudden, Democrats think they've got a shot in those suburbs.
It appears they do, and a lot of it goes back to Donald Trump. What polls are telling us is that suburban, college-educated women don't like him and don't like his policies. And that's probably going to hurt people running for the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. It's going to be very interesting in Ankeny, West Des Moines, and those west suburbs, Cedar Rapids suburbs of like Marion, Hiawatha, those areas, to see what happens. They've been good territory for Republicans, but I think a lot of Republicans are running scared.
Okay, I noticed on the televisions here in central Iowa that Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitfer of Ankeny is now running advertising. That used to be a safe seat. Is there going to be agony and ankeny for Republicans?
Very alliterative of you. I have seen no polling. Obviously, neither candidate in that race is going to say, hey, I'm in trouble, or hey, I'm going to win. But speaking to the statistics that James mentioned, it seems as if some suburban areas and even some urban areas are trending in a different way. And just to my previous point about nationalizing of the congressional elections, it's interesting to me to see the face of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in legislative ads.
Usually a majority leader raises a lot of money and gives it to other people. It's telling to me that Whitford feels he has to run ads.
That's exactly right. I was talking to a Democrat about that race, and I said, is this a seat that's really up for the grabs? And the answer was essentially follow the money. Like you noted, both parties are spending money on ads there. They wouldn't be doing that if they thought didn't think it was competitive.
The House is in play. How about the Senate? Aren't Republicans?
Oddly, no. In fact, the Iowa Republicans could grow their majority in the Senate while losing the House. That's a plausible scenario here, and it's just because of who's up. Senators, only half of the Senate is up every 2 years, and the ones that are up are safe Republicans.
That would be significant. Democrats could win the governorship, they could win the House, but if Republicans hold the Senate, nothing that the Republicans have done the last 3 years is going to be able to be changed in Iowa law.
That's exactly right.
Let's switch gears, speaking of what effects elections have. Kay, is there a battle for Iowa's judiciary? The national level, the whole Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court nominations energized both bases. Not much is said about that here in Iowa, but yet we know the baby boomer judges are retiring. We know there's a couple of state Supreme Court vacancies that'll be occurring in the next 4 years. I'm wondering, especially since pro-choice groups think they are going to make or are making a case to the Iowa Supreme Court that there's a right to privacy, that the Iowa Constitution has a right to an abortion contained in it, and its right to privacy. In other words, is there a battle for the judiciary? That we're going to have a governor who's elected who's going to be making a lot of judicial appointments?
It's interesting in that the Democrats who are making the argument on the issue you just raised are not making the argument about the importance of judicial appointments, whereas Republicans who've come to know this issue pretty well through the debate about the Kavanaugh nomination are making this point. If you look at the ballot and the judges that are up for retention this time around, a majority of them were either appointed by Terry Branstad or Kim Reynolds. So there is already a propensity to, see the courts as leaning conservative in Iowa's district court level, the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court, whereas, Governors Culver and Vilsack, I think, among the judges who are up, it's a minority.
James, is Fred Hubbell making this argument out there? Do we hear anything from him about?
I haven't heard that from Fred Hubbell. Just an interesting anecdote. The other day, somebody called the newsroom and they wanted to know, they were looking at a sample ballot and they wanted to know which party the judges were from. and it wasn't me, it was another reporter trying to explain they don't run on party affiliation, and this person clearly wanted them to be affiliated with one party or another.
Erin, there's no effort underway, as there was in this state a couple elections ago, to oust Supreme Court judges. Are you hearing any talk about the governors appointing new state Supreme Court judges?
That's not a real big issue on the campaign. I've not heard from either candidates, although there was a member of Governor Reynolds' staff who was making that case to a meeting of conservatives, a monthly meeting here in the Des Moines area. So it's not coming from the top levels, but Republicans are talking about it a little bit. Theoretically, in practice in Iowa, that's supposed to be a nonpartisan process. The governor doesn't just handpick a judge. He or she receives 3 nominations from a committee and chooses from those. And I don't think we've seen yet in Iowa the politicization of Supreme Court rulings like we have at the federal level. So maybe that's not first of mind here yet in the state. But it could be.
Well, if you have gay marriage issues before the court, if you have abortion issues before the court, then I can see why a governor's chief of staff would be out there talking to conservatives about we really do need to take the court. Yep. We've got just a couple of minutes left, Kay. Let's talk about the statewide races Ag Secretary, Auditor, Secretary of State?
Absolutely no polling on these races, obviously. The one race I think to watch is the Secretary of State's race. At Democratic events where you have multiple candidates appearing, the cheers for Deidre Jajir are, registering. She energizes that base in a way that none of the other statewide candidates do. Sometimes even Fred Hubble. And on the Republican side, these folks are hoping that, they can get the Republican base motivated to maintain Kim Reynolds as governor, and they can sort of swing in under those coattails.
So we need to stay tuned to those races.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming out here to do this. Appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. We'll be back with another edition of Iowa Press at our regular times next week. Joining us is pollster Ann Seltzer, and she breaks down key voter data ahead of the 2018 midterms. That's Iowa Press at our regular times, 7:30 Friday night, with a rebroadcast at noon on Sunday, as well as a replay Saturday morning at 8:30 on our .3 World channel. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.